Open University.
Hello, I thought I'd give you a progress report because I haven't spoken to you, with you, since the album was in its infancy. And I just completed 2 tracks and was starting the third. So the 2017 LP from Momus, which still doesn't really have a title, I was thinking of using some of the song titles like Pellicock or, Spurty Woot or whatever, some silly made-up term. I began the last video by saying that I had some technical problems with earwax, which blocked this ear, but actually just a day or so after that I squeegeed it out, I bulbed it out with warm water and olive oil. The usual technique, but this time it was amazingly effective, and all this gunk came out, and suddenly this ear was so bright and clear that the other ear, the good ear, sounded defective in comparison. So I've had this kind of ringing, bright quality to my left ear, and also because of the astigmatism I was complaining about, I'm still getting it if I'm looking all day very intensely at a computer screen. So I decided to work with the projector during the day. So that involved having to buy some quite expensive blackout curtains from IKEA, and then to project and use the sequencer up on a wall instead of right in front of my eyes. That's helped to some extent. I've kind of reverted a little bit to sitting there with the hot laptop cradled on my tummy. It's very hot weather though to do that, to get so hot, and actually the power cord's a bit defective. The power cord gets scalding hot. It's sort of slightly broken. But I also invested in some really good headphones, and that's been a revelation. I would have said a couple of years ago I never work with headphones. I just listen through I actually record albums with the little built-in speakers on laptops. Can you believe it? I mean, things like Bambi. And they do sound like that, because when you listen to those records on headphones, they sound pretty weak. So what I'm finding now is that it sounds weak on the laptop and it sounds great on the headphones. So do listen to these new tracks on good headphones, and I think you will be surprised at the audio quality. I'm kind of known for having crap sound, like the late Mark Fisher, when he reviewed Hypnoprism, said, the sound is deliberately hampered and lo-fi. I am a lo-fi artist, but at the same time, sound matters incredibly much to me. I mean, it may be a different type of concern and a different type of sound than mainstream stuff. Okay, I'm going to talk you through the songs which have materialized. There's 10 tracks completed now for this record. A slow rate of production is what I promised. So I had a trip to Tokyo. I took a couple of days out. I'm going to have another trip to Tokyo at some point over the next month, I think, to see the Yokohama Triennale, I hope. But most, my slow rate of production is most people's fast rate of production. I knock them out pretty quickly, and I think that spontaneity it allows you to touch some kind of Allen Ginsberg quality of there's a certain rawness and immediacy to the material you get that way. And also it's like the early days of rock music where they would knock out an album in a week. Obviously I want it to sound interesting though, and I work with such intense dedication on the sound, especially with the headphones. I get so deep into it, and I'll be listening to a track over and over for hours, and then doing the video for hours, and I'm physically racked at the end of that, but I'm also very, very exhilarated by it. There's nothing in my experience that's quite like working so intensely and so compulsively on music. So I wanted to tell you, amongst other things, the really interesting part for me of doing this is I do have failures, of course I do. I mean, I don't just bang out these amazing tracks I kind of do bang out pretty amazing tracks. I mean, I do think that I'm an amazing artist. I even amaze myself, because I think that the quality is pretty high. At the same time, there's kind of nothing to measure it against, because it's so anomalous and often its own little sub-niche, really, that there aren't really other Momuses to say, well, is he better than that other Momus? Maybe it's Neil Hannon or someone like that, God forbid. But I'm amazed by what comes out, and I remember a story about Paul McCartney being at a party with David Bowie, or hosted by David Bowie, and Bowie had just made, I think, Young Americans, and he was playing the the test pressing over and over again. And McCartney at some point in the evening said, "Don't you have any other records? You know, can we not hear the same thing over and over?" And Bowie was kind of offended because Bowie loved his stuff, had this narcissistic attachment to his stuff, and I really understand that. I think that the opposite attitude is Nick Cave. It's a sort of inverted narcissism of saying, I never listen to my own records after I've made them. You know, the making it is all that matters to me, and the next one is all that matters to me, and I don't want to sit there listening. I do sit there listening, and I watch my videos a lot, and I go back and I compare what I'm doing now with what I did last year, or not so much what I did 20 years ago. But I think it stands up well. I mean, the thing is that style is limitation, and I've got this palette which I've deliberately limited. I showed you last time the World Scales program, the app I'm using for a lot of these sounds on the iPad, and I continue to use that. That creates an Arabic ambience. I started to get a little tired of that. I think that really came to its head with the Ghost song. Okay, let's go through the songs chronologically then and see what emerged. So I was just beginning to say, well, there's a bit of Purcell that I like, and I want to do something with that. And stylistically, that's a bit of a step away, although I was making some sort of, I was squaring some circles by saying that, well, the Elizabethans were influenced by Arabic culture, and, you know, the Arabian Nights and all the rest of it, and Pasolini. I was trying to bring all this stuff together, which doesn't really have a lot in common. You might say, okay, what is there in common? What is the Venn diagram which sees an overlap between Arabic music and scales, Elizabethan music and the madrigal form, and this Japanese folk music as well? How was Momus doing that? Actually, the appearance of Pasolini in the video for Italian is a bit of a clue. Pasolini had this amazing attitude, a kind of global magpie attitude, where he would do Medea, for instance, he would film it in Morocco or Algeria, and he would use Japanese gagaku or courtly music or even folk music, you know, to create a sense of strangeness. And he would say, well, it's about the distance. Or he would, I don't know if he actually said this, but he would, I think the logic is that to actually generate the same sense of strangeness and awesomeness and awe that you would have got from, you know, the actual music of Medea's time, or ancient Greece, you know, whatever, you have to go to an even further, a more foreign source. So he would use it as maybe a Brechtian alienation device as well, use this Japanese music, which is very alien and strange, and he was even more so, I think, back in the 60s when he was doing that. So I think it's all about the exact distance of those different cultures from us, and I find there's a distance the Elizabethan culture has from us in its language, also its musical forms, and those sort of the instruments I was talking about from the Shakespeare productions, where I worked with the Dufay Collective, for instance, or I listened to bands like Griffin, Comus as well, maybe even mention Comus, Momus and Comus. Okay, so after Macbeth, which was obviously Shakespearean, I then do another kind of thing from that period, a pastiche, you know. I was just watching this indie documentary the BBC did in 2015, and saying, oh, no, everybody in this documentary, it's about the ethic and the aesthetic of indie. And yet, it's kind of weird that they're saying Stock Aitken Waterman annoyed everybody by being in the indie charts when they were doing this totally different genre of music, and simply the distribution was independent. But when I think of my own trajectory, I'm now even further away from the traditional indie aesthetic, which is, you know, bowl haircuts and Breton fisherman's shirts and some kind of Fender guitar sound, Stratocaster, whatever. I've got so far away from that. There's actually no real guitar on this record so far at all. I do pose with the guitar in one of the videos, but there's no real guitar at all. I've always been kind of down on guitars because precisely it leads you in that generic direction. So, as I was saying, the limited palette is imposing a certain kind of unity, even when there is a kind of weird cultural bastardization going on. There are a couple of moments which give me pause and disturb me a little bit, and maybe I'll come to that as I describe the individual songs. There are still moments when I feel that cultural appropriation is not legitimate. or it's not useful, or somehow shouldn't be done, and I feel bad about doing it myself. And weirdly enough, the Judy song, the psychedelic song, is one of those moments. Although I was there in the 60s, I was listening to Revolver pretty much after it came out, when it came out, bouncing on a bed to Tomorrow Never Knows and doing air drugs. As Sarah Cracknell once put it, we were all doing air drugs in the 60s. Even if we weren't doing real drugs, we sort of had the psychedelic experience, like Obelix or Asterix being dipped in the magic potion. Okay, so the third song is Charcoal, and I do that after coming back from Tokyo, and I'm refreshed. My cells have been refreshed by the Tokyo visit, and Fellini seems appropriate. After Pasolini, the video is Fellini's Casanova, of course. Donald Sutherland, who's an ugly narcissistic lover, playing Casanova, the Venetian paramour, the Don Juan of Venice. For some reason, that seemed appropriate, and I was happy with the way that turned out. Thank you for complimenting me on my vocal chops on that. It's just, I guess, having been in the school choir, I do know how to do that sort of the official, when you roll your R's, and you have a certain kind of pronunciation which is only used in songs. And of course the danger with that is that you're going too far into pastiche and irony. And yet, of course, those things are a mask. Somebody sent me to listen to Ween. I'd never listened to Ween's album, The Mollusk, and I could see again, operating there, the idea very strongly that irony is a way into a kind of sincerity and is a mask that you wear in order to show your real face. So Charcoal, yeah, there's not very much more to say about that. Gorilla, I'm a little worried about, in the sense that it started very obviously with this piece of material I'd heard. I experienced at Documenta, which was a song recorded in a refugee camp on the island of Lesbos. Syrian refugees singing this song, children actually, singing this song with an oud and a girl's voice. Beautiful, beautiful song, and so I really just transcribed that song and then made it into a new song, which I called Gorilla also. I think the original was called Gorilla. Of course, the original is not a published song, but it was written by someone. I don't know what it means. It might have a political meaning. It might be a terrorist song, or it might be the opposite. It might be a counter-terrorist song. Who knows? As usual, I just waded in. The important thing for me is appetite. It's important that I feel there's some wild spirit of something, It relates a lot to this piece Adorno wrote in Minima Moralia about how Northern Europeans project soul onto Southern Europeans, and now that's in a global context, rich people in advanced developed countries projecting soul precisely onto those whose conditions of life are such that they cannot really have soul, because soul is really, and this is a very Brechtian point, soul is a luxury for the moneyed classes, for the middle classes. You can be soulful if you have some leisure time, you're not constantly working your ass off just to survive. So that was what interested Adorno, this paradox that we see soul precisely in those whose conditions of life do not allow it. In the end, soul itself is the longing of the soulless for redemption. That's the killer paradox for Adorno. So I see that a little bit in this Gorilla song, that here I am, a very I'm not very wealthy, but a very privileged and free person from a wealthy country, going to Documenta, this incredibly kind of refined art event, and hearing a song from a refugee camp. At the same time, though, I do think there's a value in saying something very positive about welcoming these people, these refugees, that they are the new Europeans. I'm very much dedicated to the European project, and I think that it needs fresh blood. And when you think that Syria shares a border with Turkey, which is on again, off again, potentially a member of the European Union, you can see how far the idea of Europe could extend potentially, and it could go right up to the Syrian border. And at that point, those refugees almost become Europeans. They become the neighbours of the European project. Anyway, so the video, I think, expresses a little bit. You'd think that I should look serious in the video, but I'm grinning and smiling, and actually refugee and guerrilla are kind of loaded, very loaded politically terms. But I'm trying to say welcome refugee, possibly welcome guerrilla also. Shake things up, but don't kill people. Ghost, the next song, is probably the song I'm most happy with overall, and it's Nwara, the singer Nwara, who's still alive actually, she's in her 70s I think now, who worked, she's an Algerian, a Berber singer, worked a lot with a guy, an arranger, who basically discovered her. She was a children's television presenter actually, and he discovered her. I think he's called Cheb can't remember his name offhand. So they appear in the videos. They're the very stiff and awkward characters standing in the background, and I particularly liked their manner when they were waiting for the verse to come along. That kind of waiting and the awkwardness, like Cheb is kind of looking off into the scenery somewhere in the background, and she's kind of standing with her hands clasped, and they look very uncomfortable in a way which inspires a lot of confidence in me, I suppose, because they're not sort of X Factor wannabes. They're not kind of trying to be slick professionals. There's an awkwardness which is trust-inspiring, I find, endearing in that, so I use that in the video. And Ghost, actually the lyrics for that come from this Japanese anthology of 100 poets. A lot of the poets in that, it's from about 1,000 years ago, and a lot of the poets came from this region. People singing or writing very short poems about Naniwa, Awaji Island, which I can actually see from here. Normally, it's actually a bit misty today. I can't see Awaji Island. It's the land bridge connecting Shikoku to Honshu here at Osaka Bay. It was amazing to me, this image of the cherry tree on the mountain and the city below, that actually is an image of Osaka from 1,000 years ago, from a poet. And this was what people were feeling 1,000 years ago in this very location. So that is my authenticity. I'm not a Japanese person, but somehow reading translations of these poems, I feel I can tap into something of what they were feeling, the solitude or the love or whatever they were feeling 1,000 years ago. So that song then gives that spiritual dignity. So musically you're kind of in a cafe in Alexandria or Cairo or somewhere, but then lyrically you're in the Osaka Bay area a millennium ago. That kind of boggles my mind that you can do that in songs. And after Ghost then comes Judy, which is this funny song. I mean, I'm very... it's funny that the jazz butcher Pat Fish was commenting on my Facebook page and saying, oh, this is obviously Syd Barrett, and I felt like a strange temporary unity with my ex-Creation band label mates, because actually on Creation I was probably in a snobbish way trying to dissociate myself from all that 60s revivalism, which then culminated in Oasis, basically becoming the Rutles. But it was in me nevertheless, and we do have common ground in that we all grew up in the 60s, or I guess they're my generation, a lot of those artists, and so our first experiences were psychedelic, late 60s, Beatles, Pink Floyd, all that stuff. That was very important. So what I discovered was that you can reverse engineer that stuff by getting into ethnic music and then just simply melding that with rock, bass and drums. So I almost stumbled on this by accident. So I found somewhere on YouTube this an instrumental version of Starman, David Bowie's Starman, without any of the vocals on it. I don't know where this came from, and it's great to listen to. And I said, well, I can do something with that. So I chopped it up, put the chords together in different ways, and then put all these ethnic Egyptian samples from TV productions from the 1960s. These beautiful bendy string sections, and there are amazing farfisa organ players you see on these videos. Beautiful 60s white organs with coloured keys, although it's black and white so you can't see, but I then went off researching farfisa organs and sampled people playing these amazing farfisa sounds. And if you put farfisa together with bendy strings, which could be Indian strings, but actually they were Egyptian strings, the ones I was using, with a drum and bass rock backing, what you get is George Martin, the Beatles, late 60s. That is precisely that, together with some kind of novelty, with Stockhausen samples or some kind of avant-garde orchestral thing going on at the same time. That simply it simply says the Beatles. So in a way I was a little worried when that turned out. I mean, a lot of people loved that. I could see why, because it was weirdly authentic sounding. As a 1960s pastiche. Probably if you sat down to actually pastiche the 60s in a more direct way, you wouldn't come on something so authentic deliberately. It had to be the accidental reverse engineering thing of, oh my God, I've just invented, you know, the jet engine or whatever it is. You sort of do it by accident when trying to do something else. And what I was trying to do in that context was, I don't know, I was trying to make rock music sound more Egyptian, but I ended up with George Martin. So there is nothing new under the sun, and that disturbs me a little bit. It began to get too much into pastiche and maybe different styles of pastiche. I was rather hurt, actually. You know, I do these amazing records, and I think they're amazing. I'm proud of them, and I think always when I make a song, I think it's going to be a hit. I think it's going to be massive and viral, at least on the internet. And then it's not. It gets 1,000 views or a couple of thousand views. And rateyourmusic.com. The last record, I think, people do their little mini reviews on there, and somebody said, oh, this Glyptotech record, it's good for the first 30 minutes, but then it outstays its welcome, which is always a cardinal sin. And I'm always a bit conscious now that I just tend to fill up a CD, I fill up all the, you know, the 70 minutes you could stick on a CD with any old thing that I've done for the sessions. And that maybe I shouldn't just clutter. You know, there's songs like the Counting Song or Imperial on the last record which shouldn't be there and which I never listened to, and I'm sure many people just skip. Or, you know, so in a way I was trying to avoid putting clunkers or even just, you know, interesting experiments on this record. Nevertheless, there were a couple. After Judy, there were a couple of misfires. I lost my mojo. I lost whatever it was. At least I think I did. I wasn't confident at all. Let's have a listen to these, because I think it's quite interesting. This one's called Swans.
Beyond the things I know I want lies everything I want. How wonderful to ride upon an electronic swan. Too much of a good thing can still be a good thing. Speaking without judging, hearing myself say, the dear puzzle, my thoughts about it is still the day.
And so on. This one, it's a little bit more introverted in tone. The vocal is not very confident, or it's not mixed right. And it was influenced by watching a lot of Adam Phillips on YouTube. Adam Phillips, one of my heroes, really, an amazing, subtle writer and thinker, psychotherapist, psychoanalyst. And so it was something, he'd quoted Mae West as saying, too much of a good thing can also be a good thing. Everything some of the other stuff in there, it's the sort of typical Adam Phillips-like paradoxes. I used to be called the psychoanalyst of song by certain music journalists, and I think that was quite a good sobriquet. I have been very influenced by psychoanalysis, but it doesn't always make great songs. These subtleties and paradoxes don't always work particularly. So that one I thought was, I wonder if there's a chorus. There is a kind of chorus there, but it's just, it doesn't work, that one. And also I didn't like, that musically that started with a sequencer riff from a sort of 70s rock record, or experimental record. And I liked that on its own, but as soon as it's integrated into the song, it doesn't really work anymore. And then after Swans, I did a song called Whites. They all have one-word titles, as you probably noticed. Whites played by black actors at getting out of bed, stretching into yoga poses, eating their white bread, drinking their white coffee, wearing their white masks, reading their white newspaper, the White Telegraph. Musically, this is better. It plays the race card a little bit in the lyrics. That white's played by black actors, so it's imagining a theatre production where black actors, the opposite of a minstrel show, black actors play white people. A little bit influenced by the Blacks by Genet. The most flagrant injustices cannot disfavor the whites. Or it's a bit like that website, Things White People Like, which satirizes liberal middle-class white people and their good intentions. Actors take their white children to school, driving through safe neighborhoods in armored vehicles. The whites are wearing whiteface. The whites are wearing whiteface, even though they're white. It's actually quite interesting. This one might have potential for recuperation at some point. So when I made the video for Pillycock, the next song, the material, which actually comes from Stockhausen, Idori, I think it's called, or it's a presentation in which there's a couple of people, white people, who sit on a platform and do these sort of semi-religious gestures with masks and clasping their hands and bowing and looking at each other. And quite a strange choreography where they're just seated, but the upper bodies are doing that. So I used that, and this was originally going to be for the song The Whites. They were going to be the white couple.
Trains, the whites believe on platforms, their politicians itch to whiten up the borders and fatten up the rich.
The politicians itch to whiten up the borders and fatten up the rich. I mean, it's a fairly obvious critique of neoliberalism, and I guess I was a little uncertain about that. It seemed to make too much sense. Stop making sense is always good advice. This album has been some amazing automatic writing or cut up of Thomas Nash, and so I didn't want to make too much sense politically, and especially not about racial issues, because then it's like this is what white people say about white people. You get into an endless recursive self-critical loop. So I rejected that, and then I worked on Pillycock, and Pillycock sort of is the result of going to Satoru, and Satoru, who runs Forever Records here in Osaka, and getting a couple of vinyls of Japanese folk music, pretty much the same stuff, although it's actually LP length this time, the same kind of stuff that I've been sampling for the last couple of Momus records. And so I kind of reverted. It's the return of the Japanese repressed, because I was, in a way, the Arabic Bairati scales had been dominating musically this record. Now this is me saying, okay, let's go back to those Japanese folk music samples and mix those with the Bairati stuff. And so Pillywink is very much that, and Pillycock rather. It's I missed, actually, when I was talking about Ghost, I was going to possibly play. No, that's just an early version of that. The Purcell, actually there's an early version here of the Purcell, it might be interesting. So you can see that I actually Arabified the Purcell. Da 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 da. So the idea was to make a kind of North African version of Purcell and make it more consistent with the feel of the other tracks. In the end, I kind of it actually works quite well like that. Those synth sounds are actually sampled from Richard Barbieri from Japan Records, so you have this new romantic meets Arabic meets madrigal meets Purcell kind of sound, which pleases me a lot, and there's potentially you could do a whole record in a kind of early Japan plus madrigals, plus Arabic music way. Anyway, that it ended up much more going with the strings and a much more Western approach. Oh, this was amazing. This this is Michael Jackson testifying at a copyright court case in which he's asserting his authorship of The Girl Is Mine, the duet he did with Paul McCartney, and he's singing a cappella in the courthouse with evident pleasure the phrases from the song which he wrote, and they're listening to demo tapes he made which prove that he's the author of the song. And I was watching this on YouTube, and I had another window open, as is my wont, in the background, which was Irving Berlin. Actually, because I was reading up on Wikipedia about The Girl Is Mine to see what this conflict was about, and it said, amongst other things, that the song is an example of AABA structure songwriting, and one of the most famous examples of that is this old Irving Berlin song. I even forget what it's called, but you can hear it in the background of this. And what happened was that I kind of forgot Michael Jackson was playing in another window, and I suddenly heard them together, these two bits of music, and it really worked well.
Because I really feel it's time that she tell you I'm the one for her, that type of thing. I love you more than he, take you anywhere, and I go, but I love you endlessly, loving you.
So what happens there is that he's singing on kind of African pentatonic intervals, really, do 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 do, with blue notes everywhere. And when you put that against this sort of gypsy influenced Irving Berlin thing, do 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 do, it actually works beautifully. And so I started to do these quite black to bring another thing into the recipe, the meld. Quite black melodies, and often, this is super key, important musically, actually counterposing a major and a minor. I'm sure there's a technical term. I've actually been watching quite a lot of technical videos about music, because I don't know much about musicology, the theory of music, and things about like cadences, or even the distinction between modal and tonal, all that stuff, counterpoint. I really am pretty weak on that. I've never studied technically music. Yeah, this thing where you actually singing, breaking the rules really of Western music, singing a minor and a major together. And I do that quite a lot on this record. There are moments when it's either very ambiguous whether I'm in a minor or major chord, or I'm really playing heavily on the switch between the two. Crusoe's a bit more straightforward Brecht and Weill with the Arabic sounds, and originally it just had the verses, it didn't really have a chorus, and what happened was at the last moment I thought, hell, this could be more interesting if it went up to a different place and with a different rhythm in the lyrics. So this thing of so here we walk like Crusoe and Leonardo, and all the playing with people's names, Valentino, the end with O. That was a very last-minute addition, and I've done that before. That happened with Mr. Consistency, that song on Hypnoprism. I suddenly sampled the whole backing track and pitch changed it, and then made a new section with the pitch changed section. So that's why it sounds actually beautifully kind of blurred and a little bit distorted. And what were synths become flutes, or they become garbled and mangled in a really interesting way in that middle section, the chorus as it now is. So that turned out really well, and I was thinking, God, I've really got it. It's back. The mojo is back. I've really found how to write songs again, and I'm really surprising myself. I'm sort of reaching, because in a way I've got into the habit of not even writing choruses or bridges for songs. Sometimes, I think it's very important to say this, that sometimes the most important thing in a song is the minimal optimal effective unit. That's a kind of pedantic and lumbering way to say the thing that works the most can sometimes be the simplest thing. It can be that shift or a clash even between minor and major, between verse and chorus, or simply between the 1 and the 5, you know, those basic musical intervals. How can you can dress them up? It's like sex, you know, a body is not inherently that exciting. You've seen it 100 times before, naked or clothed. But you can dress it up in certain ways and present it in certain ways that suddenly you think, oh yeah, that's why I like breasts, or why I like curves, or whatever. It's because there is something, you know, biological in it, there's something cultural in it, and it all comes together at certain little moments of revelation, you know, epiphanies, when you think, yes, going from the 1 to the 5, or the 1 to the 4 and then to the 5, or then you know, going a third up, going from minor to major, all those little tricks. You find new ways to play them. It's the same old Joker card, you know. You find a new way to play it, a new context. So Crusoe did that notably. That's the song, probably the most show-offy song on the record, in a sense, that you know, it really came right because it did something. I mean, it had this really interesting Brechtian kind of eccentricity to it, and then suddenly it goes bang in the chorus. So I kind of repeat that a little bit with the new song Eurotrash. Again, there's a chorus where, I mean, the verses are a little bit febrile, and you know, kind of some of the lyrics there are a little bit ropey. I actually did an edit version where I cut it way down, didn't cut out half the lyrics, but you needed those lyrics about, you know, yogurt shops and gentrification in order to get this, you know, New York City, you are dead to me. The power of that, bang, 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 the rhythm changes, and there's a certain kind of desperation and anger in that chorus, and it needs the kind of tentativeness of the verses to really hit home. I discovered. And the other song, just before Eurotrash, 2009, that's weird, that got edited down. It's very sculpted, actually. I think there is a much longer version with more lyrics of 2009 as well, but in the end I really... 2009 was the one that started off with Michael Jackson, and I think you can hear it still. It's always 2009, 2000 and 1,000. Is it minor or major? You know, that's a perfect example. Always 2009. It's a kind of blue note. I think technically you call that a blue note, and it's when you sing a minor when a major might be expected in the melody, and it really sounds blue. 2009. So that was the one that started off, weirdly enough, with Irving Berlin meeting Michael Jackson in a purely, you know, the sewing table with the typewriter and the sewing machine on it, or whatever. The sewing machine would be on it, would be expected on a sewing machine, whatever that quote is. That one was happenstance. It was a lucky accident. And I think I've said everything that I want to say this time. 10 tracks in, this is the point at which one could stop. For a vinyl record, they're all quite short songs, they're mostly under 3 minutes, and one could stop and say, well, print, just print this now. This is vinyl. Record length, 10 tracks, 5 aside, and only one of them is over 4 minutes, and that's the New York song, actually. And even that was almost going to be less than 3 minutes, actually. So let's see where it goes from here. I think I'm still raring to go, and I still feel like there's a lot of great songs on Glyptotech that this album has to live up to, like Year Zero and The Tick of the Clock. And although weirdly enough, those are the songs I don't listen to. The ones I loved on Glyptotech still to this day are Little Girls and Art and Design. Those are my two favourite songs, go-to songs. If I want to hear the sound of Glyptotech, I'm so happy with the way they turned out. And I don't think there's anything that my ears are hungry for on this new record to quite that extent. Although I do love listening to, Pilly Cock and even Refugee, Gorilla. I kind of, in a way, the video's a little muddy. I wish I had done something different with my face in the video, or I'd even not put my face in. But when I listen to that, I think, wow, there's some amazing moments in there. There's some almost Marquis Smith moments where you're kind of ranting, and it kind of doesn't make sense verbally what you're saying, but it accumulates and it becomes exciting, almost in the way when you make a demo and you're making up language, you don't even know what it means. That song in particular is kind of nonsense, garbage lyrics. There's also a lot of meaningful personal stuff in there, personal for me, as was the New York song. Very personal stuff about Rika Hirata, my friend in New York, who died just after I left the city, and it's now 15 years since that happened, and she would have just been turning 40 this month, so actually it seemed like a moment to think again about Rika. Yeah, so what can one say? One can describe certain things technically, but ultimately a record is a mysterious thing. I'm really utterly amazed and baffled to be able to produce a record. I don't know where it comes from. I often think it's because I'm Irish. I'm not actually Irish, but I've got some Irish blood in me. I've got the Celtic blood in me, which actually, if you look at most musicians, they have some Irish connection. And the ones who really have a facility, the gift of the gab or whatever, often do turn out to be Irish fairly recently in their family trees. I've got one Irish great-grandparent, but obviously we were pretty Irish for a long time before we became Scots. So I often think, well, that's what it is. That's where it comes from. It's just that we Irish people have something. I don't know what that thing is, though. It's a mystery. It really is a mystery. I don't know what the next song will be, where it will come from, but I am utterly confident that there will be a next song, and it'll probably be great in some way. There will be some moment of greatness or a little twist of greatness in it, and I really live for that, to discover that, because I'm not that vain a person, really. I'm not that arrogant that I think that I am simply inherently great, but I do become a conduit I feel like I'm a conduit. And here, I could be Prince or someone talking like this, but not for God, not to God, but to some kind of ultimate creative principle which is there, and it's not there in every artist. You can hear a lot of people who just seem to put things together. A lot of commercial mainstream artists just seem to do it by rote or by formula. I do think that there is something. Anyway, I'm not going to blow my own trumpet anymore, but that this is really what makes it worthwhile. I don't make much money from these records, but I know that they hit something that's really key and core. And I don't just mean that in an artistic way. I mean it's something key and core in the universe.